Godfather of Cube.
No matter what you do, you can't count on.
Godfather of Cube.
No matter where you
Cube.
standing by,
Cube.
I'll be right behind. No one
Cube.
more than I do for joy.
Cube.
No matter where you can't count on me.
Oh, look, guys, it's Usman.
Hey, everybody. I'm cool.
I'm so glad that you could actually make it. 'Cause we got stood up earlier by Jenny, Johnny, and Timmy, so we were a little short on our cube pod. But we had to deal with this weird little foreign exchange student. What was your major you're studying? Was it English, student?
I'm trying to, but I don't understand all these words that people use down here. And when I say people, I mean y'all. And what is used to could and used to should? And why do people keep saying bless your heart to me all the time? But is there something wrong with me?
I think it's bless your heart, Stu.
Aww.
Hey, May. So now we can pod up. You were just actually, May's right in the middle of casting a spell. And which spell was it you were casting, May?
Oh, I was about to cast my channel Fireball.
Would you say that's Dispel, May?
Gee willikers.
So golly gee willikers. Hey, I'm glad that we got a new member. Which member do we have, Usman?
I think I have 6 toughness because I am dismember.
Yeah, it's Dismember, isn't it? So anyways, I'm so glad you guys could join my pod because the other people couldn't show up. It's really cool. We're playing a 6-pod, now 7 thanks to Usman showing up, of Simic Cube.
What's a Simic cube?
Nobody knows. It's super weird. Well, thank you for joining us because now we can get to playing. Shuffle them up, May. Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. Uberbear, who's now opened his beer a little bit earlier than he's supposed to on the prompt.
Shame.
I know. Who do we have here again today? Dismember?
It is, it's the Godfather of Cube.
Godfather of Cube.
I feel like you need a theme song or something.
Holy
for that.
cannoli!
That's
it's
too
so
cool
nice
a
to have you,
title
but
to just
yeah.
say on a podcast. You know, we gotta make something out of that. I think.
You said you
Yeah.
liked that little riff track. You weren't expecting that when I did the Mad Libs with you on that particular
No.
episode. Now, were you? You're like, what the hell's he
I
doing?
had no idea. I was like, what is going on here? I'm like, but I've been in the Discord for a bit too, so I've kind of just gotten the vibe too. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right.
Through the magic and power of editing and Audacity, here we are. And we're joined by our favorite host, and she knows who she is, and she tries to defer all the time.
It's my bit. It's what I do.
That's what I do.
Also, hi, I'm May, also known as Miyagi.
And then we have our foreign exchange student.
It's Stu.
Hi, Stu. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm good. How y'all doing today?
So, before we even kind of crack a lack into this Simic conversation, despite all the goofy jokes that we've made prior, we're going to kind of talk about some news. And the one piece of news that I actually want to share is we have a brand new Patreon. Patrick has a Discord name that's, I won't even try it. It's like little something. I don't know. I don't even think it's actually a real word. So Patrick, you know who you are. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And then this particular episode, I think might actually make someone very happy. And it's our
Friend of the channel.
friend of the channel.
Friend of the show.
Friend of us.
Friend of us.
Stephen Konefal.
Friend to the world, Stephen Conefal.
We're going to talk about Simic, Stephen, and all the things that the primordial ooze that we refer to as Simic. So I think if there's one listener out there that might actually enjoy this, I think it's Stephen. If Stephen doesn't say he likes this episode, I'm not sure what we do at this point.
I think we just quit.
Yeah, I
at
think
that
we quit.
point.
'Cause
If we
every
can't
pack-
make him happy with a Simic episode, then I don't know. We're toast.
Every pack one, pick one. It doesn't matter what the card is. You could have a Dark Confidant. You could have a DT in there. It doesn't matter. Steven just picks a Simic card.
Absolute Black Lotus. No, I think I'm going to take this. I'll take this Simic Signet.
Spiral
I think
growth,
this Simic
I think.
Signet
Yeah,
is
there's
probably where I'm
Ancestral
leaning.
Recall, Spiral Growth. They're almost the same. We love you, Steven. Thank you very much for being our friend. Thank you for being a friend. Very Golden Girls there. And also, I want to announce UberCubeathon, which I'm going to talk about obnoxiously here. But something really cool happened this week. We actually got the LGS to agree to running it as a 64-player Swiss event.
Yes.
I don't know if you've been following that, but I was pretty excited. That took a little bit of nudging. Last year, due to circumstances, we did do a single elimination type of scenario because we fell a little short. We had to do some serious audibles on the fly that we talked about during our planning episode. And I highly recommend, and I will include that in the show notes, go back and listen to that episode, learning about like all the trials and tribulations of running an event and the things that can happen, plan A, plan B, plan C.
And just
We had to do some serious like...
We did, and also we definitely wanted the bulk, if not all of the event to be the event, right? So we didn't want to have people getting eliminated or, I've drafted this, deck that I'm not happy with and I've gone 0-2 and now I'm just going to drop and, kind of impacts the experience for everybody. So we wanted to have a format that was going to be fun for everybody, that was going to be competitive, that was going to give everybody a chance to play a bunch of cubes, play a whole bunch of matches, have the chance to win all kinds of cool prizes. And I loved last year. I think this year it's going to just get knocked out.
And the tickets are selling on good pacing right now.
They are.
We got some left, but they are moving a lot faster than they did previously.
It's an exclusive event.
It is. And like I said, right now, this is kind of how it's changed. So round 1, according to the plan, will be 64 players. Round 2 will be 64 players. There will be a totalization of, using the typical tournament scoring points.
Yep.
There will be breakers. There will be bubbles for all those people that know I'm talking about. The judges will work all that out. And then the top 8 will emerge. All the top 8 gets paid in this scenario based on 64 in attendance. They did put that in the notes. I told them to do it. They did it. So 64 is where all these kind of benchmarks come from this pricing. And I am working on a custom playmat that I have drawn and designed and painted that I haven't shown to the world right yet. And I said right yet. That's you got to learn that word too.
Right yet.
Right yet.
Right yet.
Yeah. And in addition to that, we now are going to feature 17 cubes. That's including the final, 17th being my Power Vintage cube. So we've populated more cubes in each round. We've got a big plan. It's going to be fun. And then even if you wash out a round 2, and we don't hope you do, we're going to have a free play zone post that. You can cube literally
all day
to pure exhaustion, which I appreciate everybody can do it. I can't do it. Usman, can you cube that long?
Yeah, probably. I would need some coffee and maybe a nap.
So
yeah,
and I
definitely
went and
nap.
cubed this past weekend at Ravenforge Games. What did we do? 2 cubes?
We did 2,
It was wonderful.
We did the Legacy Cube, and then we did your Artifact Cube. And I will say, I was definitely feeling it by that second cube draft.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting old, or I don't know. But
No,
it was.
you are old.
I am old. I am
yeah,
old.
We're not getting.
Yeah.
We're not getting.
Even though you're
we're not
older than
getting.
I am still old.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful event. It was in Sanford, North Carolina. It was for charity for
$3,700, I think,
yeah.
estimated for
Yeah.
basically
Fantastic.
supporting homeless transition back into the workforce.
All kinds of
helping
social
them out,
programs
getting them
for
back on
homeless
their feet
people.
type
Yeah,
stuff. It was
absolutely.
fantastic.
It was great event, great venue, and I hope we see more events down
A lot
there
of those
because
people
I'll
are
take a
planning on
trip.
coming out to our event. They told
I
us
hope
they
they do.
treated us. They treated us so kindly. I did originally. I know I'm tangentially here. That's what you said that last time, Usman. Do people go on tangents on podcast? But they did invite us to actually feature my cube when all I presented as truthfully was if you have an overflow. And they were so kind to go, no, we're going to get Uber Bear's Artifact Cube in there. And that, so then I wasn't even going to play it. Someone else actually had a little bit of troubles with the draft, and they go, hey, you can have my spot. And it was whatever. I fell into it. But I had a great time. Thank you, Ravenforge Games, for running such a great charity.
Yep.
This is the type of stuff we like to see.
Great event.
And then lastly, and I'll make this short and sweet, UberCube is a TCG Player affiliate.
Partner.tcgplayer.com/UberCube.
Yeah,
We've already seen some support with some ordering using that link of ours. Obviously, it costs you nothing. Just a little bit of the total of the order, a little percentage will come to us for, new mic stands. I actually think that the mic stands I got are pretty good.
Limited effort. We get that on the back end, and you get all of your
Supports
Fast
the
and
show.
Furious cards.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pokemon cards.
Death Race, whatever it is. I don't know.
Lorcana. Whatever you're into.
So, other than that, we're going to go ahead and have the drinks that we are going to have for the show today. And let's start out with our good friend Usman. What are you having?
Hello. So it's called Sparkling Ice Orange Mango.
I love
I don't know.
those.
It's flavored
Love 'em.
of some
I
kind.
drink them all the time.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with them. They're so good. May,
Mhm.
what kind of tea/concoction are you having today that's better than everybody else's?
So I'm having something from Mardo Brewing Co. It's a fruited sour that says it's like that. It's like this cool pixelated
Ooh.
aesthetic for the can. I'm thinking it's a cider. Maybe
I mean,
it's
there's one. There's
some
one
kind
way
of
to find.
some
you
kind
sure?
of sour. It sounds good.
I was gonna say there's one way to find out by tasting it.
Yeah, May, did you
Yeah.
buy it in the store or outside the store? I feel like we should ask that question. But so I am having a hazy beer hug, and I think you are twinsying me here. We didn't even do it on purpose. But
We
here
didn't,
are. They are
but we're doing
delicious.
it. And I got some Guinness in the fridge. I haven't had a Guinness on the show for a while, and I'm still holding out hope for that sponsorship. You never know, one day. All right, crack 'em.
What archetype is Guinness?
Yeah, Guinness is the best archetype, especially in Ireland. Not going to lie, they taste fresher there. But I have a question for the group, and we're going to start out. I'm going to ask these individuals. May, when I say gruel, to you, what does it mean? What do you envision?
Stompy.
Okay, Stu, Boros.
Aggressive.
Okay, that was the easy one. How about you, Usman? Demir.
Guinness.
There you go. Good answer. I
Control.
like it. I
Yes.
like it. It is very Guinness.
Probably like mostly control and like maybe tempo.
Yeah. Well, Usman,
that.
one more for you. Selesnya.
Bad.
Yeah, I'll give you that one too. We got an episode coming on that one soon too, Usman. We'll talk about that soon off cam. And then, is it May? Is it May? Question mark.
It is. Usually I think of wizard's spells.
And then I put on here, etc., because I forgot all the guilds. But what we're going to talk about is Simic, because I think, of my opinion, Simic is the hardest one to nail down. And I have a whole argument we're going to do that. And we're titling this episode, which always changes, Solving Simic. So I'm going to do some follow-up questions here. I'm going to read 3 cards to the group. And then I'm going to ask you all the question together as a group. Feel free to just do whatever you do, right? So I'm just going to name them, and I'm going to include them in the show notes, and I'm going to do the plug here. If you like any of the cards we talk about, then use our TCG Player affiliate link. All right. Nadu, Wing Wisdom, Oko, Thief of Crowns, and Uro, Titans of Nature's Wrath. What do they have in common, Usman?
They're 3 mana and they are not fun.
Yep, that is a fair assessment. Go a little deeper. Dive deep
They've
into
taken
that.
over the formats they've been allowed to be a part of.
Yeah, I guess it's easier to say what they're allowed in now as opposed to what they aren't in.
Okay, let me ask you
Process
this.
of elimination.
Environmentally or contextually, where would you typically find these? I'm leading the witness here a little bit.
Macro archetypes?
Yeah.
Can I press the buzzer immediately?
Yeah, press it. Just do the Jeopardy button.
Vintage.
Yeah, vintage or legacy type, right? Let me do a follow-up question, though. Between these 3 cards, and I'm not going to read them, but I'll give the gist. Nadu, whenever you basically interact with it, you get to look at the top card of your library. If it's land, whatever. If it's not, you put it in your hand. Interaction point. Oko turns things into elk and food. And then Earl Titan is one of those cards that just dies, later escapes, lets you gain 3 life. What?
Draw cards,
draw
put lands down.
do things, right?
Yeah.
What do these 3 have in common on that tone? Absolutely nothing. They really don't have nothing. They have no commonality.
I would say that Nadu and Uro at least have somewhat of a sub-lands theme, right? Uro allows you to place one. Nadu, you reveal the top card of your library if it's the target of a spell, and you can either put it into your hand or onto the battlefield. So there's that, I guess. But Oko kind of, I think, stands a little bit further apart, other than maybe you can create a food and you can sack a food for 3 life, and you also get to gain 3 life when Uro comes in. So yeah, we're already noticing this.
You know what they do have in common? Value with a capital V.
That's right.
Yes, that would be the ultimate thing here. That's the cash grab. That's what I was looking for, mate. Because what I was actually going to ask Usman to do, Usman, you're going to do a little bit of card evaluation for these 3. I want you to do kind of your version of a first order, second order, third order as these cards, looking across them. Are they
Like power wise?
Yeah, whatever you want to do, rip it.
I would say abstractly, like Oko is probably just the most generically powerful, and then probably Uro, and then probably Nadu. I would say abstractly, right? Like they all, like Macy, you said, they all like do something. They have like value, and they all kind of do something in the face of removal. And I think Oko probably does that arguably the best out of them. Like Uro's is kind of gated by the cards you have in your graveyard. Nadu is kind of gated by like what you can target it as, but Oko just has to live. And generally that's easier to do
And
than
it's difficult
like the
to
other
get
stuff.
off right? He's so
It is
difficult to
very
get
hard
off.
to get
Comes down with 4, you create a food, now he's up to 6 loyalty. Is a lot of loyalty on the first turn as a Planeswalker. And I will actually argue, I do agree, I think that Oko, in a vacuum, out of these 3 cards, is the most powerful because he just has the ability to create so much impact, so much distraction and anxiety. Like, if you've got any critical creatures in your deck, it makes it very, very difficult to utilize them unless their ETB is bonkers powerful, because next turn it just gets elked and then that's that. But Nadu, just by virtue of the fact that it is part of I don't want to say easy, but fairly straightforward 3-card win con. If you have, there's the enchantment creature, and then there's something like Lightning Greaves that you can just bounce the artifact back and forth between the creatures
And
that
the
you
Shurikai.
have. Yeah,
Not Shurikai.
it's not Shurikai.
Whatever, the throwing star thing.
Shuko?
Shuko.
There is Shuko.
Oh, yeah.
But
Shurikai,
Lightning Greaves, obviously, I don't know. Yeah, whatever 0 mana to equip, and you can just bounce them and just go off and win the game that way. But I will say, Uro was actually in the deck that I drafted during the Legacy Cube that we played over at the Raven Games, and it never won me the game, but it prevented me from losing or dug me out of a hole every single time it came down. It was such a huge difference maker that it was very powerful for me.
Okay, let's take this again now. So I don't want to go ahead and tell everybody I lifted these from my Powered Vintage Cube. These are exactly as May said, these are value engine cards. Now, let's look at them not as a group, because they're all the same colors, but individually. Where does Nadu fit in the scheme of things? I'm asking an open-ended question. Where do you play this at?
You play it in a combo deck.
Okay. That's good enough.
Yeah.
Oko, where do you play that at? Usman?
Deck. Like, honestly, most base green decks, if you can splash it, probably most base green / base blue decks.
Yes.
But pretty much just, it's not really gated, but like archetype wise, it's just like, can I cast this? And then I'm playing Oko.
Yes.
Yes. And then
Agreed.
May, you guys are doing this for me. May, the next one, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. What deck do you play that in? Where do you play that? Is there a deck that wants that?
Yeah, I feel like that most just Simic value things want Uro just because its fail case is just so good. But generally, things that benefit from like sending things from the graveyard, like self-mill decks, are particularly good with it.
Okay, and I got one last one for you guys. I'm going to share this. We didn't throw this into the grouping. Kolma World Eater for 3 colors. Green, green, blue, blue. Legendary creature Serpent. 8/12. The spell can't be countered. Trample, Ward 4. When Kolma deals combat damage to a player, create 4 3/3 Serpent creature tokens named Kolma's Coil. Usman, what deck do you want that in?
Ramp or some way to cheat it into play.
Reanimator, sneak and show type of deal, right? Something like that. Even where it even gets sacrificed, or some kind of instant, like through the breach.
Sneak attack through the breach for me, those kind of, I mean, I will say that this has definitely got a home in other formats. We don't talk about Commander too much, but I actually played in a Commander pod recently where this was played, and it
That's
absolutely
disgusting.
it was disgraceful. The dude had like 40 3/3 tokens, and that was the end of that. But yeah, just the fact that you're getting so much value, even if it's 5 mana for sneak attack or through the breach, to be able to attack with an 8/12 and then get 4 3/3s is just crazy value.
So back to the 4. These are all in my Vintage Cube, Uber Bear's Powered Vintage Cube, which I'll include in the show notes. I think May really just said the thing that I was really digging for here. They're all just value. They're not really, they're all standalone creatures. They don't look alike. They don't feel alike. There's no likeness to them at all, right? They're very value generic, kind of, and really hard. And Usman kind of, you said this a little bit. I'll just splash whatever and put it in with Oko.
Are you saying that that's kind of the identity that Simic has? That Simic is basically the value town
It is the de facto
color?
primordial ooze of cube, I'm going to say.
Even though I would still say, like, Nadu as a combo deck is absolutely nuts. Like, you can win games, not easily, obviously, it's Vintage Cube, but you can win games fairly consistently with a well-built Nadu deck.
So, I actually checked, and I think I got this right. I went ahead and just kind of did a Scryfall check, and I counted, and I could be wrong, but listeners, feel free to check me. I did this kind of on the fly while working, but I counted 290 pure Simic cards in existence as of today's recording.
290?
290.
I'm going to question those numbers.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think there's a lot more than 290.
May, you want to check me real quick on Scryfall, please? You're faster than Stu. We can go ahead and start. I can start a timer.
I'm actually way ahead of you on this.
Nice.
All of the cards that are in paper whose color identity is Simic that are either hybrid or gold, there are 290 with those conditions.
Yep. So there's
That
not as
is
many.
insane.
I know, right? That kind of like threw me off a little bit too.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. We see that with we see so many of these in various cube types. I know we started out with Powered Vintage, but think about all the interactions, Usman, you've had throughout the years of Cube, and May yourself as well. I thought this was jolting when I saw this number.
Yeah. That's like 5 commander decks. You're telling me there's only 5? Well, I suppose there's going to be some commonalities there. But wow, that does absolutely blow my mind that there's only 290 just green-blue cards.
Yep, which is weird. And then the next question I have, I'll present this to Usman. And this is a generic open-ended question I wrote too. Is the environment driving the purpose of these individual cards or just the cards?
I mean, it's probably both, I would say. Like, this probably touches more on stuff that I'm probably going to bring up on the episode, but there's not really, partly they point to just generic value rather than what they're doing. You know what I mean? I don't think the environment is necessarily driving the purpose, at least with these individual cards, I would say.
I would agree with that.
So I guess
they're generic power engines in that group. That subset, contextually speaking, those are my Powered Vintage cards. Those are just the ones that float to the top or the most impactful, or May said, the strongest value engines. Would you agree with that, Stu?
I mean, certainly, again, I think Nadu definitely is a combo piece, although it doesn't have to be played in a combo deck, right? You can still just get value out of it in a sort of passive way. But Oko for sure, and even Uro, like it's not a particularly difficult place for it to be in a deck, right? When all you've got to do is spend 3 mana to gain a life or gain 3 life and draw a card and ramp yourself, right? So for 3 mana, that's incredibly good value, and you've got the added gravy that you can cast it with this
Oko
escape.
or Uro?
Uro. This is Uro, right?
Okay.
So you've got Oko is just nuts value, period. Yeah. Like there's it's one of the great all-time great value cards, I will say, that you could, like Usman said, if you can fit that in your deck, you're playing that in your deck, no doubt. But Uro as well. I think for 3 mana, you're getting great value, and again, that gravy of just being able to escape it, and now you've got a 6/6, and it can just kind of sit there as this tension piece. So, is it going to win the game by itself? Maybe not, but it's never too bad to leave out of your deck.
So, May, we kind of did this legacy vintage conversation where the word generic kind of got tossed around a lot. Value engine got tossed around. That's actually the expectation I had. Each one of those cards were chosen not because of their flavor wins or any of the above, right? So let's transition to something that you're very knowledgeable about. But we're going to switch over temporarily to a struggle that I had in UberBear's Artifact Cube, which, is going to be featured at UberCubeathon. I got to toss that out there again one more time.
Of course.
But I want to mention the fact that in the Wayback Machine, and we talked about this before, so I don't want to overly speak about this. There was a time, I believe it was at CubeCon #1, where I had Trigon Predator in there, which from all reading of that is something you, without thinking about it, would kind of mesh well with the idea of an artifact-centric, even though it's destroying them and it's repeatable.
Well, it was back in the artifact versus anti-artifact days.
So
right?
that contextually may kind of set that tone. We learned this card is unhealthy for environment. That's a whole conversation on repeatable effects. We'll talk about that down the road again. But when you see a card like Quandrix Command, what do you see from Simic in that one, May? Just kind of top level. Like, how do you feel about a card like that?
So, something like Quadrants Command is particularly hard to evaluate in the lens of Simic, not only just because Simic doesn't really have strong identity points like the other colors do, but because commands just tend to do so much. And I feel like Quandrix Command is kind of this culmination of things that green does, things that blue does, and +1/+1 counters. And to a certain degree, I feel like that there are a lot of environments that kind of build Simic like that, where it's just, yep, you are taking the things that blue does well and the things green does well, and then maybe sometimes marrying them together with a +1/+1 counter theme. And not every environment wants to do that, which can lead to this weird, let's say, tension with some of these gold cards. When it comes to Quandrix Command, it is just a generically good card because, take it from the top, it can bounce something, it can counter an artifact or enchantment, it can put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature, and or target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from the graveyard back into the library. So with these 4 different effects and being able to choose any 2 of them, you are essentially taking the palette of everything blue and green has to offer and kind of shoehorning it down to 1 card. And we see this a lot with other commands, but in the particular case of Quandrix's command, there isn't really a unifying thing here outside of just, I can get value and I can put counters. And you see that a lot with how Simic cards are designed. It is, I am doing something that is high value, high impact, while also getting value out of it. So even if we took it out of the +1/+1 counters range with Mystic Snake, which could fill a similar role, right? Where it is, yep, I get a creature on the board, I get to counter something. It is significantly more simplistic in terms of its design, but it actually still reinforces the idea of what Simic kind of is, yep, I am doing the blue-green thing, I have creatures, I'm doing counter spells, and I'm doing value things, and I'm sorry that this is a little bit more intricate of an answer than you were looking for
it's
this
exactly what I was
command
looking
card.
for. It goes back to that. Sometimes people don't want to dive that much into the explanation of it, and we kind of just, these are just kind of the putty cards. That's my whole argument of this episode. The primordial ooze of cube is what I've kind of probably will actually rename this episode, thinking about it, right? But look at Quandrix's command. So Usman, return target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. What is that, green or blue?
Oh, definitely blue. Yeah.
Okay. Counter target artifact or enchantment spell.
Mostly.
Yeah, that one's
I mean,
a weird one.
I was gonna say it's mostly just like blue with being counter, but it's like also just hates on artifacts and enchantments, which is kind of what green does.
Yeah. And then put 2/1 counters on target creature.
Yeah, it's definitely green.
Right.
And the same with the bottom one, yeah.
And target player shuffles up to 3 cards from their graveyard in their library. That is kind of what a Gaia's Blessing type of ish, right? Which I wouldn't have actually at first glance, full disclosure, I would have seen the word shuffle and went immediately to blue on that, on the dissection of it. But you're right. So we're kind of 50-50 blue-green with a mixture there. Actually, it kind of blends in the center there with that counter target artifact or enchantment, which outside of like an annul effect or something like that, right? It's really weird. If we take Trigon Predator and we do the parsing that we did there, Trigon Predator is 1 colorless and it's Simic. I mean, 'cause that's what we're talking about. Creature Beast, 2/3. Stu, what are the attributes that makes this blue and what makes it green?
So blue is it flies.
Yes.
And green is you destroy a target artifact or enchantment.
That one's a lot more easy to parse.
It's very easy.
If you had to look at it, right? As far as we talked about, May, I don't know if you recall the episode, we talked about basically what the cards with the kind of the color pie blends together, and we kind of step outside of that. I think Quandrix's command took this weird little amalgamation in the center, kind of did a little bit of soup there, if you will, right? Let's kind of move.
It's just the nature of command cards and modal cards.
Yeah, I think it is, but I think it kind of spells out what I was going to talk about. I put, does Simic have a true identity? That's the question I have for this group. Does it?
So
I think it can. I think
It
you can
can.
build one through your cube. Do you want your cube? Do you want Simic to be +1/+1 counters and counter things?
May, to reflect that question, do you create the identity for Simic?
depending on the cube, yes. In the Fey cube, no.
I can see that. So, Usman, as I run through these, you tell me if I'm wrong or I'm right as I go through these. I try to summarize these. I said +1/+1 counters is a very Simic thing to do. Anti-artifact and enchantment can be a Simic thing to do. Drawing cards. And then I put kind of filler, no tie that binds, as in you don't really define it. May just kind of said that out loud. It's a thing that had placement. And then my question I put in there that makes no sense is I put, or is it just good stuff, generic? I mean, what is Simic?
I think you could have this discussion, right? Some of these points will apply regardless of the color pair that you're looking at, right?
It is,
what
but
does black-white
we're
apply?
saving those for other episodes,
Right,
Stu.
I know. I'm just going to make that statement and leave what red-white or what black-white or black-green or whatever they represent. You could have this conversation about any color pair. You could either be generic or you could be cube-specific. But what you're saying is that this is blue-green's identity, period. Blue-green's identity is value, a little bit of ramp here and there, a little bit of counter magic, a little bit of +1/+1, a little bit of destroying some artifacts and enchantments, and that's kind of that.
Yeah. Usman, would you define, if I'm wrong in making this statement, and I've kind of did the primordial ooze and the putty, would you think this is the most malleable of all the archetypes?
Probably,
Sub-guilds, if I'm calling it that.
I would say. I'm trying to think of others that are more, but I think this probably fits that bill. Yeah.
What do you think, May?
So, I have a weird relationship with Simic.
Most people do,
Specifically
May.
because
Most people do.
of... Say again?
Most people do, May.
Yep, yes. Most people do, which is the whole reason we're talking about it. But when it comes to, like Stu was suggesting, when we take the lens of what are the iconic things that other color pairs do? For example, let's say iconic Boros instant card, right? I think Lightning Helix. That's pretty iconic for what Boros does. It deals damage, it heals, puts on a lot of pressure, it can make its way into a lot of decks, it's generically good, but it kind of blends what red and white are supposed to be doing as color identities into just a generically powerful card. When we think of Simic, then we're going to be more inclined to think of Growth Spiral, right? We're more inclined to think of Growth Spiral than we are to think of Simic Ascendancy. And it is not to say that you can't make the archetypes in Simic, but I feel like that it is more of a conscious decision than it is a accidental one. It takes a lot more effort to make a Boros archetype not just aggro than it is to make a Simic deck have a specific identity, whether that's copy effects, +1/+1 counters, or just value stuff.
Just let me put a bell strike right there, a gong, whatever I need, because that is exactly what I'm trying to say. That's it. Yeah. No reason. You just literally hit the nail on the head.
All right, thanks for listening.
Yeah,
That
thanks
was
for
good.
listening. That pretty wraps up the episode.
May just sums it up in
thanks,
12
May,
seconds.
for completing the episode. We're, approximately 32 minutes in, pre-editing. All right, so...
You know something that Simic does really well, though? Big spells. I don't think that there is another color pairing that does big spells nearly as well as Simic, just because the amount of value ramping whatnot that you just have access to makes it so that you can consistently get into your big dumb spells, which is why we see such big impacts from cards like Goose Mother or Hydroid Crisis or Simic, what was its name? Simic Sky Swallower.
I was going to say
right?
Simic Bob.
But my point is that even though these big expensive spells exist in other like color combinations and other archetypes and whatnot, especially with things like Sneak and Show and Reanimate and whatnot, Simic does a particularly good job of providing the tools and the payoff within its own color identity. And I think that is neat at the very least.
Well, outside of all the Cheaty McCheatersons, right, I actually would say that Treasures, right? It's 2025. What was the year of Treasures? 2024, 23.
2023.
Probably 23.
Probably 23 was really the year of Treasures.
Pick a date.
And now, like, poor Simic, like, it used to have under wraps, like, if you want to cast big spells, I got you. I got the ramp. I got the ability to be able to get your big dumb creatures or whatever out there sooner. But now a little bit of that identity's kind of been stolen from it with these treasures.
That's kind of the homogenization
of magic.
Of magic in general, right? Where everything's castable. I don't want to get into the whole 5-color good stuff because I particularly like it, but it does create that degree of homogenization that Stu's alluding to. And treasures are a culprit with devaluing something. I want to shift back to a question, though. This is directed towards Usman. Is the broad nature, the whole whopping 290 cards, does that
330 if you're including cards that are technically colorless and
I didn't
cards
do the hybrid.
that also have
we're just going to go
alternate color
flat
cost
rate,
and whatnot.
purist, Simic. Does the broad nature of these cards, their malleability, their borderline homogenization, generic attributes, does it make it hard to slot into... I know it's easy for Powered Vintage, right? We just did the cream that floats to the top. That was pretty straightforward, right? And those are easily swappable, replaceable, whatever you feel, right? But when we get in these thematic designs, you want to do something interesting. I don't know. We'll say 100 Ornithopters, Uber's Artifact Cube, Maze Fae Cube. You can go into the Cascade Cube. When you start trying to make these things meld into that idea, is there an overabundance? Are they hard to slot in? Is there a lack of attachment? There's so many questions I can unpack here, but I'll let you run with it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's, I guess, a lot of thoughts I had going,
Me too.
and I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of just how to articulate them all.
15 questions
So,
in one, so.
I would say regarding these two questions, and I'm glad you put these in a PDF so I can read them again. The broad nature of the guild can be difficult to slot in a card. I would say I don't think it does. It might depend on the overall power level and probably what someone's trying to do. Even like power level, like maximization, maybe not maximization, but just goals and things like that, I think can determine like where you want to put things. Like, if there's the ability to put those. I think a lot of those cards referenced earlier, like Nadu, Oko, Uro are pretty generically good. And they're just kind of putty glue. You don't really need to do something like that. Whether asking too much of curators to make a piece fit when it feels like it's putty. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily a thing, right? So I guess to point back to what May you said about Lightning Helix, it's an iconic instant or sorcery. It's probably just generically the best one. But Lightning Helix is a very iconic card, right? Like you were saying, May, in terms of just it being like an iconic red-white card. But depending on also just external factors, right? It might be not really good enough, big quotes, good enough in, whichever decks. And it might just be, depending on the format, it might not be a card that's just for red-white. Maybe it's a card that's more leaning for like red-white mid-range or like Boros. Maybe it's just and that's also just meta contextual, even though it's the same card.
Right.
Also, it depends on mana fixing, like you were talking about the last episode, where mana fixing can be used as a tool to define what decks are able to do in terms of how greedy they can be. Like, exaggerating the example, if I was to say the only fixing is guild gates, they're probably not going to be splashing for a Lightning Helix in, like, say, a Azorius deck, for example. But deck with a lot more fixing, that's certainly a lot easier to do. And I think that's the thing with a lot of these cards in Simic too, is just, like I said with Oko, if it's good enough to splash, then you can splash it. Even though Uro requires double pips on both of them, by the time you get to escape, that's not going to be a problem most of the time. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to the question,
That's
is I don't know if it
fine.
really is, and it also ties to some other thoughts I had, but I don't know if I want to soapbox too much.
No, keep soapboxing. Soapbox on. That's why we brought you on. Godfather of Cube. Let's
That's
go.
right.
Hi,
Okay.
Usman.
So the funny thing is, I've been doing Cube for like 15 years and designed a cube based on Ravnica, just a whole bunch of archetypal kind of things. I've never really designed to archetypes, or at least I never designed to color pair archetypes, I should say. Like, I've never been like, or at least I would say within the last like 5 years, but probably longer, where I've never really felt like this deck has to be this. There's also stuff like, honorary cards like opposition. It doesn't see as much cube play now, but that's an example of like an honorary Simic card, right? Where it's just like at least I thought it most commonly saw play there, right? Where it's just like, play it with elves and whatever, and like that's where it tends to be played a lot. Like, in theory, any deck can play it, but most of the time it was in Simic. There are probably some other examples I can think of, but that's a good example of like a way to guide the archetype.
We have a really old episode that we called Opposition and Squirrels, where we were basically, remember this episode?
I
This is
do.
the Wayback Machine.
I do, yes.
We drank a lot and talked about a lot of squirrels. It's really great.
Nice.
And y'all's weird, I'll call it fascination with,
I like squirrels.
what was that one card called? The one with Squirrel Link?
Oh my god.
Oh.
Squirrel. Yeah.
You had
Earl of
feelings
Squirrel.
about that card.
I had very strong feelings, given that we drafted a cube, and it was it the two-headed
Two-headed
giant cube? Yeah.
yes.
And so myself and our good friend Kevin was on one team, and Anthony and I believe Nathan or
Yeah,
Christian was on the
Nathan.
other team. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got a fairly good bead on what this cube's about. And all of a sudden, this Earl of Squirrel appears. And I'm like, I'm waiting for Anthony to just like start bursting out laughing and then take it out and then put like another card in. And he doesn't. He just sits there with Earl of Squirrel on the battlefield like it should be there, like it's appropriate. And I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous, okay? And I'm look, maybe it's years of being a child and watching my mother throw broom heads at squirrels for eating the top of her plants that I'm not quite as enamored with the squirrels as Anthony is. But yeah, but I agree. Opposition is, I would agree. Symbolically, it's a Simic card because, you've got all the token generation through green, so you can just untap, upkeep, bang, 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 get rid of all your lands, you're locked out of the game. Something I've noticed about, going back on kind of the theme that you mentioned, right?
Real quick, this episode's been brought to you by Earl of Squirrel. If you want to find Earl of Squirrel, you can find it on tcgplayer.com, our affiliate link. Carry on, Keebler. I'm just having fun now.
What is something you kind of notice about so there's 3 cards, right? Again, always reference the show notes. First one is Growth Spiral.
Well,
Second
you got to give a little reference. You're jumping ahead. This first-time listeners, May. This is about the Fake Cube.
This is about the Fake Cube.
Tell the listeners what the Fake Cube means and why it's the most famous cube in the world and how Milton Bradley just signed a deal with you.
I'm not going to talk about that.
Is Milton Bradley
But my Fake Cube is a cube that I've kind of become noted for. It's showed up in CubeCon a few times. It is a low-power environment.
And UberCubeathon.
It features a lot of tap lands. A lot of it is mostly subtype focus and whatnot. But I am glad that you put highlight on the Simic identity in the Fake Cube because it is a particular pain point that I've been having that I feel like that there's a lot of other cube curators that also have this issue where there is a lot of distance between the best cards in Simic and kind of the most okay cards in Simic, right? So we have the central identity cards like Growth Spiral and Mystic Snake and whatnot. In my Fake Cube, there's not a lot of really good flavor options that I have to work with, so I just had to go with these generic, here's Growth Spiral, here's Wistful Silky, which is just like Simic, 2/2, comes into play, draws a card, and then Lore Scale Coatl, which is the most interesting card of the 3 that just, it's a snake, and whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it's fine, it performs well, people don't complain about it. However, when you look at some of the more, let's say, defined subtypes that kind of accidentally become these color combinations and whatnot, so like Jund is goblins, because there's just a lot of goblins in red, black, green, right? Or fairies is usually in Dimir, right? There's a very clear line for the Fake Cube of, here's this kind of identity point, and because that identity point happens to exist in these colors, you're naturally drawn into it rather than just, I designed these specific color combination to just be this subtype, right? But my point with this is that the pain point is that I don't have a way to create a central identity for Simic in a way that feels organic to the Fake Cube.
So I'm going to throw this at Usman. Of these 3 cards, Growth Spiral, Lorasco Coatl, and Wistful Selkie. What's the attribute they all have in common? Kind of the first order thing you look at when you see these 3 cards.
Mainly just the draw card thing. That's the text that kind of sticks out on those.
Yeah.
I guess to ask, like Maggie said, there really isn't a cohesive identity in Simic. Does there have to be?
No, I'm going to counterpoint
Not
her.
particularly,
I'm
no.
going to counterpoint you entirely, May, on this one. So we're going to go art forward as the first order of operations here for your particular cube. So Growth Spiral, the art that you have chosen, which is so beautifully rendered, is very kind of, I don't know, it's a person kind of going through a portal through some vines. It's very magical, very mystical. The next one's a snake, which shows up in a lot of your Grimm's fairy tales, a lot of your storytelling, right? It's not a far-reaching thing to go there. And then you have this Wistful Selkie, which is kind of like, I would say, kind of a siren type looking, even though it's defined as a merfolk wizard. It's kind of got this in the river, the night passing by, gets sirened into the river. Next thing you know, they're drowning in their own chainmail. I can see all these thematically fitting your cube. Mechanically, they all just draw cards. And, Coatl gets bigger, sure. But ultimately, your art forward is your flavor first. That's your first order, in my opinion. And that these cards do belong. And I encourage the listeners to look at the show notes so they can see these different arts. But they make sense if you allow yourself to dive into that kind of that storybook element where you're opening up the pages of the fake cube. Right? Would you agree with that statement?
I would. I think they fit the cube beautifully. And this is just a me thing, even though I'm a Dimir player at heart, and even though my favorite commander deck, I've spoken about commander a lot recently, even though my favorite commander deck is a Sultai deck, which is black, blue, and green, I'm not a fan of a lot of the blue and green cards that I have in that. Or even when I play other cubes. I played a blue-green deck in that legacy cube we drafted at the weekend. I couldn't tell you the last time I drafted a green. In fact, I even think I drafted a green-blue deck in the artifact cube. And the one in the legacy cube was really fun because it was just value tan. It was not super straightforward to play, but it was fun to play. And then I played the artifact cube, and the deck I was drafting was supposed to be fairly straightforward because it was late and I was tired. And that wasn't as fun as I would like it to be. It just felt very, I'm just going to try and draw a card. Okay, I'm going to try and put a land down. And it just wasn't as engaging as it would have been if I'm trying to draft aristocrats or trying to draft a combo deck, something like that, right? The generic can be fine, the art can be fine, but from a playable perspective, sometimes that's where I think the detriment of it just being generic can stand out so much.
I land on the same playing field as Stu. I personally don't seek out Simic for this reason while I'm drafting. I just like Boros, it just doesn't do a lot for me. It's not my personal flavor, but that's okay. So I'm going to ask Usman, do you like playing Simic? Is it something you enjoy?
It's fine. It's not something I tend to do a lot, but I mean it's Magic cards and things.
Yeah, where do you
which
land
is
on
probably
this,
not great.
Yeah, where do you land on this, May?
So, my drafting style tends to be more go with the flow, read the signals. On rare occasion, I just have my brain off and I just want to force an archetype. But for the most part, it's what are the cards people are handing me and how much fun am I going to be having building that deck rather than a specific color combination. However, if I were to say that there is an archetype that I particularly gravitate towards, it's usually going to be aggro or spell slinging decks. Just because I just really enjoy playing them.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just really enjoy my Johnny Jenny whatnot of, I have a bunch of weird cards and I want to make this weird engine out of it. Not because it's good, but just because I can. And there are a lot of times that Simic lets me do that.
But going on that point, the reason why I actually did, I did enjoy playing that Legacy Cube deck. It was a Simic deck, kind of. It had one other color as well. The reason why I enjoyed it was because the green element was very lands oriented, right? So I had Titania, I had, ways to, get tokens into play, and I had some other fun stuff to do. The reason why I liked the blue was because I kind of felt that Uro was going to be a strong aspect for the deck for me to just kind of stay alive at times, or even just be a big threat, and also the counter magic. So I kind of have approached, and I generally think that I tend to do these. We're focusing this on the Simic cards rather than the Simic archetype, right? Because the Simic archetype could be you can add the counter magic to whatever the other things green can do in the cube, and that can be a fun experience, right? Or if there's good things that blue can do from an aggressive perspective, right? A trying to win the game perspective rather than just a counter spells perspective. And then green can do its thing, like maybe it can ramp or, maybe it can destroy artifacts or enchantments or whatever, if that's a big element of the cube. So
back to Usman's point, he's kind of talking about, I look at these cards, we're talking about specifically guild cards, the 290 that we're referencing throughout, various parts here. I look at them as kind of the apex, the thing that ties the deck together. So yes, you can have generic green, generic blue, and then you pick this card up later or you early on and use it as a binding point. I always look at these guilds as a binding point, like the card that kind of fits what I'm trying to do with the generically powerful attributes of both those color subsets. Usman, you had some points you wanted before I close this one off. Get in there.
Yeah, so there was 3 major points. I typed them in a notepad to show, I guess that's how my brain works. The first one was kind of just when looking at archetypes. Like I said, I don't design for archetypes. I kind of feel like they kind of create themselves, and it's something where the designer POV will be to make something, and then just the way things turn out can be different. Like sometimes it can be where they kind of happen naturally. Like Boros just happens to have a lot of aggressive creatures, And a lot of the times that just means attack with a whole bunch of stuff. And that just kind of happens naturally.
Mhm.
But for something like Simic, it sounds very weird to use this in terms of Magic. But in business, there's something that's called a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is something I honestly kind of forgot about because I wrote about it years ago, like 2011, and then kind of forgot about it until they did my KubeCon panel. But kind of the way I structured that was to look at what each color is doing, and it's like its strengths, its weaknesses, and its opportunities. Threats, probably not as much in Cube. It might be more of like what gets printed, but like strengths, just kind of like what is each color good at in an environment. So like green is good at ramp. What is green like ramp? Relatively large creatures, artifact hate, like we discussed earlier, counters if you care about that kind of thing. That can be something to do. I'm trying to think of other like it's planeswalkers in cubes with rares are generally good, and there's generally a lot more of them, so that's something you can build around. That's what's coming to mind initially. And then blue, of course, card draw, stack interaction, evasion, kind of. And that way, and like weaknesses, like it can't deal with creatures that will permanently. Like it has bounce as a thing you can do, but not really permanently. Its ways of dealing with with some permanence is not great, like imprisoned in the moon or whatever. It's something it has, it's just not great. And my way of looking at certain looking in Simic, like green and blue cards, the colors themselves, is to look and say like, okay, what are these colors doing for Simic? I don't usually do it that often, but like if I find like Simic's not doing well, like what do I want to do? And it's something I found like useful. In terms of using the multicolor cards to guide archetypes, like sometimes they can accentuate what the archetypes are doing, or they can kind of go against it. The examples I was thinking of was like Kolaghan's Command and Duretti. I know it's in Rakdos, but there's a point to this. So sometimes Rakdos can be very aggressive, and these Kolaghan's Command and Duretti Ingenious, what they called? Ingenious Iconoclast.
Yeah.
There we go. And like those kind of go counter to that. Like they kind of push it more towards mid-range and value kind of things. And people may still do that, right? Like you've seen people play like, generic Rakdos control or whatever, or mid-range. And these can kind of give incentives to pull away from that.
Mhm.
And that's something you can use to kind of pull your deck towards that archetype. And how much does that really matter? Like, number of colors, something like I said with the fixing as well. Are people being drawn to play Simic because of Uro or Coma or Growth Spiral? Or are those just things they're playing because they happen to be that? And I guess the third point was that not every color archetype is going to be perfectly balanced, and that's okay. That was a big thing for me, was looking at, I wanted all my color archetypes to be perfectly balanced and like win rate and whatever. And like honestly, that's never going to happen.
There is
there's
always going to be a worse archetype.
Don't tell that to the Gruul werewolves, because they still have a chance, guys. They still have a chance.
They-
No, they don't.
still-
There.
It was kind of
You can huff your copium.
yeah. I was gonna say as long as you get the big picture things right, like as long as the macro kind of stuff, which I talked about in the last episode,
Right.
I was on. As long as you get the big picture stuff right, ramp isn't awful or it isn't overpowering, then
Mhm.
that's fine. Like if people are just playing Hydroid Krasis in, let's say, Azorius splashing green, that could be fine. I mean, it could be something you may not necessarily care about. I don't really care, but it's like, is that a feature or a bug for you? And that's just design goals too. All right, that's my soapbox. Or I guess my three
I
soapboxes.
actually agree with your soapbox, and I'm glad that you went on it, because it mirrors a lot of my approach when it comes to cube making as well, because I tend to take a step back and let my players kind of dictate the decks that they want to make. It's how I ended up with Selesnya Elves / Wolves, which is so unique for the Fey Cube. But I guess it's just this weird itch that I have where it's just like, I want people to figure something out in Simic, so that way I can be shown something that I'm not seeing, but it's just not happening. And that's the lack of opportunity is what's particularly rubbing me the wrong way, I suppose.
Sounds like you need cortisone 10. So let's kind of move over to something different. We've done 2 thematic cubes. We've talked about the artifact cube, which was problematic with Simic. And I only run 1 guild card, 1 guild slot in there anyway. So I kind of like that, actually. It makes me proud to do it. And then you have your kind of draws matters kind of, that was the equilibrium point, the balance point between your 3 Simic cards. It was Growth Spiral, the Quaddle, and we're going to call it the Merfolk. I can't remember the name. It had some weird name. But in this particular segment, we're going to talk about Sandwich's Peasant Cube. And this is a rarity restricted uncommon cube, because that's what peasant means. And this was featured at CubeCon 2023, CubeCon 2024, UberCubeathon last year, and UberCubeathon this year. And I want to kind of find some commonalities between these 2 cards. So I'm going to ask kind of a Usman and May and Stu kind of question here. Find the first order, where these 3 cards land. And I'm going to leave these in the show notes. A lot to read here. But Kiora, Behemoth, Beckoner, Make Your Own Luck, which is from the Cowboy set that nobody loves, and then Repulsive Mutation. When you look at these 3 cards, do you see any commonalities in these 3 cards whatsoever? Usman, you first.
Macro-wise, I would say big creatures is what these all are. Big creatures, because a lot of these they all care about, Kiora cares about big creatures. Repulsive Mutation is probably best with big creatures. And like Make Your Own Luck just wants to cast big stuff. So yeah, I would say that's probably the underlying theme.
What do you see, May?
Big spells. It's kind of what I hinted at before. Simic likes big spells. Kiora rewards you for playing big spells. Make Your Own Luck lets you, I'm not going to say set up Pseudostorm, but there's a reason it ends up in Pseudostorm decks. And then Repulsive Mutation is just a pretty decent big spell card.
And Stu, our foreign exchange student?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, at least with Kiora and Repulsive Mutation, I like having a large creature on the battlefield, which is nice. But if I was going to use a word to describe all 3 of them, it would be messy.
Yes, I think that takes us back to what we're talking about. Every one of these we talked about, we've kind of had a hard time putting a label to it. I mean, we said counters, we said blue attributes, green attributes, but it's real. And I know that's in the color spectrum. I mean, that's clearly put there, right? On the nose, on the 10. But at the same time, they're very generic. They're not.
Are you going to use the word, they're not
Dismember?
Fun,
yes. For me personally, because I like to have that specificity. I like to go into the aristocrats. I do vibe with you on that subject. I like the mechanical builds, and sometimes these are kind of that glue for me, but that's a personal feeling. We have 2 more that I will include in the show notes, and it's Colossal Sky Turtle, which is a weird flying ward-2 creature, and then Planar Genesis. These are all included. Sandwich's Peasant Cube, which I will encourage everyone to check out, will be at UberCubeathon 2025. This is a sick cube, by the way, Usman. I'm hoping to see you there. No pressure twice. Twice, no pressure.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have Usman.
One thing I was going to mention earlier about the SWAT thing is that you can also kind of tailor your environment based on things. Like the big creature thing made me think of that, right? Like both of these, if Simic's identity is playing big creatures, it's like, has to play them at sorcery speed. So it's kind of a weakness could be cheap stack interaction or cheap creature interaction, like edicts, counter spells, etc. And that could be a knob to dial as well. Like if you're trying to kind of subtly make Simic that, go big archetype better. And I think these 2, Sky Turtle, kind of a big mana, but also just generic value, and Planar Genesis kind of similar, where it's just like generic value that works at instant speed. And I guess that's the thing. Both of those work at instant speed. They both kind of do a nice thing. Also kind of go a little bit towards maybe more flashy kind of decks, which I didn't look at the cube list, but I'm intentionally not doing it to not look if that's a thing. But that's what my brain kind of goes to when I see those cards.
So to kind of go in the wrap up here, the final thoughts. And I have a question I'm going to pose to the group because I wrote these questions out. It took a lot of time. I think approximately, 23 minutes. But is Simic kind of a blank slate, a mold into environments? Primeval Putty, Goop, something we just slot in, space filler, all these things. Is that wrong in that assertion?
I get your comparison. I'm not sure whether or not I agree wholeheartedly, but I will give you a soft agree at the moment.
80%? Am I passing?
Yeah, around an 80% agree.
Okay.
That's all you're getting.
Usman, where do we land?
I'd say there's certain ways you can tailor it, right? Like like you can tempo. It's kind of like blue black. The answer I gave to that, right? Like what does it do? Like primarily control, and then like tempo. Like standstill is like a good tempo card. That inclusion of it can say, hey, blue drafters, you can play tempo-y stuff. And that's kind of the same thing where it's just like initially thoughts are like big ramp and going big, and then like potentially Simic tempo. But I don't know if that's really a good deck. But again, that's kind of format dependent. But I think it is pretty malleable. There are certain ways you can go, taking advantage of blue strengths and green strengths. But I don't know if I'd say it's a blank slate, but maybe it's like a canvas. That's like, a white colored canvas. You have like certain constraints, but you have directions.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you land, Stu? Besides boring. And we
It's
love
not
Steven.
boring.
Love Steven.
It's not boring. I think there's a lot of pressure on the curators to apply Simic in a way that isn't just, hey, the blue cards within a Simic package are part of a counter package, and the green isn't big creatures and +1/+1 counters. I think environments where that is not the case, and there's other real reasons to use Simic outside of just the obvious, then great. And I think that's where, again, Usman, I think you're bang on the money. Like, you have got not necessarily a completely blank canvas, you've got kind of a bit of a guidebook, right? If you're trying to build a house, then maybe the windows and the door and some of the, the foundation and the structure's already there. But you can kind of choose the wallpaper, which is nice. And for them, a lot of people, that's all they want to do, right? They just want to walk into a turnkey and they want to choose, the paint color and the wallpaper and the fixtures and job done and move in. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, right? Not everybody wants to go into a cube and trying to draft a very, very complex combo deck or a very, very complex deck that has a bunch of different moving pieces, like your KCI combo deck in the Artifact Cube, right? Not everybody can or wants to or has the motivation to draft decks like that, right? Sometimes it's not a bad thing just to have something that just works in a very generic way to provide that option to the players.
So whatever tapestry matches my shag carpet and my velvet paintings of zebras and tigers on the wall, that's how I feel about Simic. And I have a question for you. This is the final one, last one of the day, as I left that little weird remark, is does this unidentifiable 1970s type, decor, that unidentifiable function, that uniqueness, is that what makes it interesting or generic?
I'd say probably more the latter, but I don't tend to really... It sounds really bad, but I don't know if I really care, right? Like, I just want the cards to do things, and Simic's a deck. And I don't know if it really points to having like identifiable function. I think is fine, but yeah, I think it's a deck. It's a deck out of 10.
I think what Usman applied earlier particularly resonates. Of it's generic, but that's not a bad thing. It's okay to just have a generic set of cards that do their thing.
And on that note, Usman, you got a new podcast you just fired off. You want to tell the listeners about that? And your Substack. You got things going on in your life.
I do.
Busy
Yes. So it's called Pack One Slick Ones. I always forget because I don't know. I just get tripped up. I think I get slipped up by it. But yeah, and we're starting it up, and I think I don't know how Spotify works and all that, but it's a lot more loose and R-rated language and whatnot, but it's very intentionally different from a lot of like stuff that I'd done over the years. It was very structured and very like tight knit, and yeah, that podcast is very intentionally in the opposite direction. It's been fun. It's also
who's included in that podcast? Give them a shout out.
Oh, it's definitely so Trainmaster GT, who is in the Discord, Jesse Bear, who has some really cool cube ideas, like low curving, stuff like that. And then Jane Muramas, who's also on the Cube Talk Discord, and Gay Trans Muldrifter, aka Arlo. So it's a pretty big crew,
That's
Yeah.
cool.
and it's been a nice dynamic. Like, it's been certainly enjoyable.
Yeah, so it's kind of a
And then-
conversational piece you said too before I listened to your last episode. You kind of have
Mhm.
this free flow, non-scripted thoughts on point, right? I mean, it just bouncing off each other, feeding. How do you guys? Let me ask you a question about that podcast.
Mhm.
How do you maintain order? Do
We
you raise your hand?
don't.
Or do you kick the
What's
screen?
order?
Or
Only
no order?
chaos.
we really don't, honestly. We don't have anything like the webcam setup like here. Honestly, we just kind of do it, and then it just kind of happens. I don't know. It's been kind of, and we don't really know each other. Like, we met at CubeCon, but it's not like we're like in the same city or anything. But the dynamic, I think, works well enough to where I haven't really found it to be a problem in terms of, like, people talking over each other. I think it's been pretty good. Like, I think we have a Discord channel, and like, if somebody feels like they need to say something, or it's just like, I see somebody's typing a whole bunch, I was like, yeah, somebody's typing a whole bunch. Let's give them the floor. It's
I listened to
kind
it.
of
It's got
like,
really good flow, and that's what I liked about it. Like, there's breakpoints, conversational breakpoints. And you guys are bouncing off each other. It's very clean and crisp. That's what I liked about it. So I wanted to give you a shout out. And then you have a what's it called?
Substack.
Yeah, Upstack, Dumpstack.
Substack.
Substack.
I don't know if that was a joke, but yeah, Substack. So I don't know if it was like an updog kind of thing, but yeah. So it's like, it's where I've been doing some writing. I did a post about $100 cube recently, and I forgot to link the code y'all have, so I'm gonna have to edit that to add the affiliate code. Also, I'm not sure how that works, so I may have to ping you
Me either. If that
after.
makes you feel better. I'm still waiting to see the results.
Oh, there you go. Well, hopefully this will help. But yeah, it was just an idea I had of doing like $100 cube, because I'd seen some content about using like a foundation starter or something like that to make a budget cube, and I was just like, I'm pretty sure I can just do better, and I've been pretty happy with how it turned out. But yeah, just doing a lot of writing there. I'd kind of put it on the back burner a little bit because I've been focusing on new set stuff. And then once I get the set review out, I'll probably do more abstract-y kind of stuff. But it's been fun.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on, and we're going to have you on again. This is too much fun, actually. I enjoy this
It is.
dynamic. So I hope you have all
Yeah.
the podcasting time available. Tell your other team we are stealing you. And yeah, tell them come at me, bro.
Yeah.
But this has been fun as hell. And let's talk about something very important that's happening is, again, UberCubeathon 2025 on April the 26th. 64 players, 17 cubes, Swiss, which we fixed this year. Thank you for everybody in the, it was the CubeCon Discord, gave me a nudge. Gwen Decker gave me a nudge. People said, yo, elimination no good. Cool, fixed it. Store agreed. Here we are, 17 cubes, going to be a blast. We sit around, it's very unconventional cubing. Yes, we have the white fold-out tables that you would expect, but guess what? There's bar stools, and you can sit at the bar and play, or you can go to your own little private little cubby and play, as long as we keep you within some form of visibility, because we have to control that situation. You'll hear me screaming a lot, like, please don't cross this thin red line with these very expensive cards. Please pardon that when I do that, but you'll hear me, I'm losing my mind. But we're super excited about it. And as we mentioned, we are a TCG affiliate, which we'll include in the show notes. And I'll let Stu take us away to the rest of the socials because I'm still rambling.
Yeah, partner.tcgplayer.com/UberCube if you would like to support the show by just buying your cards as you would do like any other time. Go and get your Black Lotuses, your Moxen, your Time Twisters, Time Walks. Like, now is the best time. Use that link, your Growth Spiral, your Trigon Predators.
Something kelpie.
Absolutely. You can check out the facebook.com/groups/MTGCube for a lot of discussion right now with our resident host here, Anthony Adams, going
Almost
over
a
there.
1,000
people, I know.
Encroaching.
Pretty
We'll be there
awesome.
soon. As
Pretty
Usman
awesome.
gets in there, we're done.
If you would like to support the show, you can also use our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link for some playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kind of custom and large volume products available. You can hit us up at Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod, or reach us via email if you've got a longer question or comment about the podcast, a specific episode, or one of the hosts, or anything. UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. As always, come hang out with us on the Discord. And again, to all of our Patreons at patreon.com/UberCube, a big thanks to all of you guys for the ongoing support. I should also mention, we're kind of ramping up the Blue Sky, right? If you would like to come and follow us on Blue Sky, UberCubeMTGPodcast.bsky.social. Come check us out. What about the YouTube, Anthony?
YouTube, we get comments. That's where that's the cesspool sometimes, but also the place where I get the most, nice things said too. So it's pretty sweet.
Okay, very
I
good.
never know what I'm going to get when I crack that egg open. I'm like, there's an alert. What do they have to say? And I'm like, oh. And then sometimes like, oh, you're awesome. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to read those. So if you want me to read them, just put in the front awesome, and then I'll continue reading. Then you get on me.
There you go. Well, we are at YouTube at UberCubeathon Podcast 747. Come check it out. It's just the episodes with a blank screen, but hey, as
soon as we get to 100, I'll fix that. That's how that works. We're like halfway.
Put it on your living room television next time you got a family gathering, and let everybody listen.
Let's get
to
that
the
subscriber
podcast.
count up,
That's
actually,
right.
and I'll start getting some more stuff on
That's
there.
right.
I will. I promise.
That's right.
Someday. And other than that, Usman, we're going to say the thing we always say is
Happy
cubing.
Simic is weird.